Girl, listen closely because this isn't just another marriage horror story. It's a masterclass in how to dismantle a toxic dynamic when the people you love decide you're the punchline. Factin. My name is Isaac M45, and I'm about to show you why you should never ever underestimate a man who has nothing left to lose. Fact. It was Thanksgiving, the kind of day that's supposed to be pulled straight from a Norman Rockwell painting. Thing. 23 people were jammed into my dining room, the air thick with the smell of slow-roasted turkey and the low hum of football games playing in the background. Vexen. I had spent 2 full days prepping every single dish, making sure the gravy was perfect, and the house felt like a sanctuary. Thanks. My wife Corinne sat at the head of the table, looking like a queen who had just conquered a kingdom she didn't actually build. Then came the moment she cherished every year, the gratitude toast. She stood up, holding her wine glass aloft, her eyes, scanning the room with that calculated, practiced confidence. She caught my gaze, smirked, and cleared her throat for effect. Biggest lesson this year, she announced. Her voice, dripping with venom, is to never marry a man like my husband. He is without a doubt the greatest regret of my life. Fecal. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was deafening, a vacuum where the air suddenly vanished from the room. And then the sound that shattered my heart, laughter. Feisure. Her sister started it, practically choking on a mouthful of side dishes, and soon the entire room was echoing with amusement. Fingsy. I looked at my daughter, Hannah, me own flesh and blood, and saw her slapping the table, cackling like she was watching a comedy special. Ellie. My 16-year-old looked at me with a flicker of guilt but quickly looked away, caught in the undertow of the crowd's cruelty. I didn't feel rage. Not at first. I felt a cold, sharp crystallization of reality. Months of passive-aggressive comments, the endless gym selfies, the secret phone sessions. And the growing distance, it all converged into this single agonizing second. Ease. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the floor like a death knell. I placed my napkin down, looked Corinne square in the eyes, and kept my voice perfectly steady. Congrats, Corinne, you don't have a husband anymore. Thanks. The room didn't just go quiet, the laughter died, a violent, sudden death. Her father stopped chewing his fork, frozen midair, and Corinne's smug expression crumbled into something resembling genuine shock. Phew. I walked out of that house without looking back, the cold autumn air hitting my face like a slap of reality. I spent the next hour in my truck outside a dark, abandoned hardware store, watching the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. My mind kept replaying that sound, the laughter of my own children, the mocking glint in my wife's eyes. Easy. I realized then that this wasn't a midlife crisis. It was a character failure I had tolerated for far too long. At 11:40 p.m., I dialed my lawyer and left a message that would change the trajectory of all our lives. I didn't go home. I went to my friend Ronan's place, crashing on his couch as he silently handed me a pillow and a beer. The next morning, the fog in my head had lifted, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. Think. I started thinking back to the beginning of the end when Corinne turned 43 and decided she needed to live authentically. Fade. Shed spent hundreds of dollars on a youthful makeover, treating our home like a backdrop for her new shallow persona. Fixed. Shed spent hours on her phone smiling at screens instead of me treating our marriage like a chore she was auditioning to quit. Things. Hannah had become her accomplice, the two of them whispering in corners, treating me like an inconvenient ghost in my own house. But here was the twist they didn't see coming. Finked. While they were busy playing games and performing for their social media followers, they didn't realize who held the keys to the kingdom. Every asset, every bank account, every single thing they took for granted was under my name, built by my blood and sweat. I wasn't just a husband they could discard. I was the architect of the life they were so ungratefully burning down. The day after Corinne called, the tone was different, stripped of the arrogance from the night before. He asked when I was coming home to talk. I told her I wasn't, but that she'd be hearing from someone else very soon. When the papers were served, the look on her face wasn't one of authentic living anymore. It was pure, unadulterated terror. Hannah tried to call, begging me to stop acting so dramatic and come home to fix things.
today.
I realized then that they didn't regret me. They regretted the loss of the lifestyle I had provided. The divorce wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was the ultimate correction.
You.
I walked away with my dignity, my finances intact, and the absolute peace of knowing I would never again be the punchline of their pathetic jokes.
Fix.
I heard through the grapevine that Corin's independent life didn't last long once the reality of the finances set in. Sometimes the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting. It's simply showing the people who thought you were weak that you were the only thing holding their world together all along. The silence after I left that house, that was the sound of my life finally beginning.
To note.
The air in our house had grown heavy, a suffocating silence that clung to the walls like dust. My daughter Hannah had become a carbon copy of my wife, Corinne, a shadow that trailed her everywhere.
Thanked it.
At 19, Hannah was supposed to be thriving at a state college 2 hours away. But she was constantly home not to see me, but to lock herself away with her mother.
Food.
They'd giggle behind closed doors, trading knowing glances across the dinner table, like they were sharing a secret language I was never meant to understand.
Full zen.
Then there was Ellie, my 16-year-old, who sat at the opposite end of the spectrum. She was quiet, observant, and perpetually watchful, her eyes constantly darting between her mother and me with a look of hidden grief.
Fusion.
By the time Thanksgiving arrived, I was a hollowed-out version of myself, running on fumes and confusion. I didn't know the half of it yet, but the universe was about to pull the rug out from under my entire reality.
The week after that holiday was nothing short of a nightmare.
I packed a bag and moved into my friend Ronan's spare rooms, needing distance to process the slow-motion car crash my marriage had become. I only snuck back into the house when I knew Corinne was at her gym, snatching essentials and fleeing before any confrontation could occur. Her phone was a constant assault of notifications.
Fixed Tade.
Texts oscillating between vitriolic insults and desperate crocodile tear pleas for me to come home. Her voicemails were worse shed start by calling me ridiculous for leaving.
Pivot to a cold clinical demand that we discuss this like mature adults.
I didn't offer a single word in reply. Because here is the cold, hard truth. Her biting remarks at dinner weren't spontaneous flashes of anger.
Fueled.
They were calculated, fueled by months of contempt that had been simmering just beneath the surface. It was Ellie who finally shone a light on the rot.
Finky.
She arrived at Ronan's place that Sunday, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel of her small car.
Fried.
Ronan, sensing the gravity of the moment, let her in and promptly vanished to run errands, giving us the space we desperately needed.
Thing.
She sat at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped under the weight of a secret she couldn't carry for one more day.
Bees darted.
Her voice barely a whisper. I have to tell you something, and I need you to promise. You won't hate me for knowing. Tell me, Ellie. Mom hasn't just been unhappy. Dad, she's been seeing someone for months.
Landed.
Like a physical blow to my chest. But as the air left my lungs, a terrifying sense of clarity took over. It was as if a jagged puzzle piece I'd been staring at for weeks finally clicked into place. I've seen things, Dad, heard things, Shell's so careless, now she thinks. You're too blind to notice. Ellie's hands were trembling, but her gaze was steady and fierce.
Tanner.
He's a trainer, Jim. He's 28.
28.
My wife was 43, and she was sneaking around with a boy who likely still had posters of sports cars in his bedroom. How long, Ellie?
Thinking.
Since at least July, maybe even longer. I saw a text on her phone when she left it on the kitchen island. It lit up with a heart emoji next to his name. That's when I started paying attention. Does Hannah know?
Fuge thing.
Ellie nodded, a tear tracking a lonely path down her cheek. She's been covering for her, making up elaborate lies about where Mom is when you ask. They think it's funny, Dad. They think it's like some sort of twisted girls' club.
Detail hurt more than the infidelity itself.
My own child actively participating in the demolition of my life, treating my heartbreak like a punchline in a private game. Why tell me now?
Feigned.
Because what she said at Thanksgiving was disgusting. Ellie said, her voice rising with righteous indignation. Everyone sat there sipping wine and laughing like you were some sort of punchline.
You like. You deserved.
The way she treats you.
You deserve.
The truth. Dad, I've been carrying this for months, and it's been eating me alive. I reached across the scarred wood of the kitchen table and squeezed her hand.
Thank you.
Ellie, thank you for being brave. Hannah told me to mind my own business when I tried to say something to her. Ellie added, shaking her head.
You told me.
Mom deserves to be happy, and that I should just furniture in this house.
Furniture.
The word burned, but it also crystallized my resolve. What are you going to do? She asked.
For no yet.
But I need you to keep this between us for. Now can you do that for me? She nodded, a determined set to her jaw. Yeah, I can do that. After she left, I sat in that kitchen for hours. Silence of the house replaced by the loud rhythmic beating of my own heart. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney, asking one specific life-altering question. We live in an at-fault state, don't we? Yes, we do. Why?
Feeds.
Because I said, looking out at the cold gray sky, everything just changed. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in controlled precision.
Feed.
To the house, fully aware of the legal trap of abandoning the home, just as Ronan had warned me. When I walked through the door, Corin's face went through a rapid cycle of shock relief and then suspicion.
Faint.
She tried to pivot, acting as if the entire Thanksgiving fiasco was just a minor misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context. She even suggested marriage counseling, throwing out ideas for a weekend getaway to reconnect. She became unnervingly attentive, asking about my day, offering to watch football with me, trying to mimic the warmth of a life we hadn't lived in years. I played the role of the oblivious husband perfectly.
Fig.
I gave her neutral answers, accepted her hollow gestures, and let her believe that she was successfully reeling me back in. Every night once she fell into a deep alcohol-laden sleep, I retreated to my office and went to work.
Feel.
I tore through our finances with a fine-toothed comb, and what I found was pure unadulterated rot. Corinne had siphoned over $18,000 out of our accounts in the last year alone.
Fact.
There were cash withdrawals that couldn't be tracked and credit card charges for boutique hotels I had never visited. 4 different hotels in 4 different towns, all while she claimed to be attending corporate conferences or visiting friends. I documented every single cent.
Bent.
I pulled screenshots of every bank statement for the last 2 years. I cross-referenced her business trips with the charges at these hotels, creating a timeline so damning it would hold up in any court in the country.
Things.
I even accessed our phone records, finding a trail of late-night texts and long-distance calls to Tanner that proved the betrayal was as deep as it was long-standing.
You.
One night, she claimed she was at her friend Karen's for a birthday dinner. The records showed a charge at a Marriott 40 miles away.
Edie.
Another weekend, she supposedly went on a wellness retreat with her sister, but there were 2 nights charged to a downtown boutique hotel.
Thangson.
I knew thanks to Ellie that her sister had been home in bed with the flu that entire weekend. There was even a charge at a high-end restaurant we used to visit for our anniversary. That one stung, but it also sharpened my focus.
User.
I made copies of every single important financial document I could find. I secured the mortgage records, proving my inheritance from my grandparents, the $42,000 that served as our down payment. I had the insurance policies, the tax filings, and the proof of infidelity. I wasn't just planning a divorce, I was building a case. I was no longer the furniture in the room.
You chat.
I was the architect of the truth, and I was just waiting for the right moment to burn the house down.
Beck.
The day of the hearing finally arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with a tension you could slice with a knife.
You.
Corinne looked immaculate as always, sitting in her designer suit, projecting the image of a wronged, confused wife. Her attorney sat next to her, looking bored and overconfident. Then my lawyer stood up.
He didn't shout.
He didn't need to. He simply began to lay out the timeline, the bank statements, and the hotel receipts, projecting them onto the screen for all to see.
Face.
Face went from pale to a ghastly, translucent shade of gray as the evidence mounted. The judge looked at the receipts from the boutique hotel, then at the dates where she claimed to be with her sister,
Beauty.
and finally at the photo of her with the trainer that we had subpoenaed from his social media. The courtroom fell silent. Corinne's lawyer tried to object, but the judge just held up a hand, his eyes fixed on the evidence.
Finged. This is not a matter of irreconcilable differences, Mrs. Miller, the judge said,
His voice cold. This is a case of deliberate, calculated deception.
when the verdict came. It wasn't just a win.
It was an absolute reclamation of my life. I kept the house, the inheritance was protected, and the alimony request she had filed was laughed out of the room.
We left the courtroom.
Corinne tried to approach me, her face a mask of pleading desperation. "We can fix this," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I made a mistake, but we can start over." I didn't even stop walking.
Finged.
I didn't even look at her. The time for talking ended. Months ago, Corinne, I said, my voice steady. You spent months treating me like a ghost in my own home. Now you can find out what it's like to be one.
Fing.
I walked out of those doors and into the bright, sharp sunlight of a new life. Ellie was waiting for me in the parking lot.
You didn't need to ask how it went.
She saw the weightlessness in my stride, the way I stood taller than I had in a decade. We got in the car, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a prison.
Felt like peace.
Hannah had called me begging for the family to stay together once the news broke, but I had blocked her number the moment I left the courthouse. Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed back. They're meant to be burned. So you can stop looking behind you and start walking towards something real. I was no longer the man who was being used, played, or sidelined. I was finally truly free.
Feet.
The silence in the kitchen was heavy, almost suffocating, as I stared at the stack of documents on the table.
For months.
I had been meticulously gathering every shred of financial evidence, tracking where our life together had quietly bled out.
Fix it.
My grandparents' inheritance, the $42,000 down payment on our home. Every cent was fully documented, traceable, and legally shielded.
Things.
Ronan, my rock, through this nightmare, spent 2 nights a week helping me organize the files, his dining room table, serving as the war room for my new reality.
Through the timeline.
I'd crafted, his eyes sharp, as he scanned the evidence. "This is comprehensive," he said, tapping a folder. "She won't have a single leg to stand on when this hits the courtroom."
Figs. That's exactly the plan, I replied.
My voice steady for the first time in weeks. I had also reached out to Carver, a friend deep in the world of property management, asking him to look into the man Corinne thought she was hiding.
Bats.
The report he brought back was staggering. Tanner was a financial catastrophe, a man evicted from his previous apartment for missed rent, and currently deep in the hole for his current one.
Ghost.
Living on borrowed time, his leased car overdue for payments, and his entire social media persona built on a foundation of debt. "Your wife is basically his personal ATM." Carver told me, his tone dry.
Fingjin.
Based on these numbers, she's funneled at least 12 grand into this guy over the last year alone.
Thing.
Designer sneakers, an expensive watch, gym clothes that cost more than my first Carol charged to our joint accounts while she claimed she was just out buying groceries. The irony of the situation was a bitter pill to swallow.
We had traded a decade of our marriage
for a man who couldn't even pay his own phone bill. I sat down with my attorney Polak, who explained that in our state, adultery was a powerful card to play.
Fizzes are good,
Polak advised, but paper trails are golden. We need the physical evidence, he texted, the receipts, the proof that marital funds were squandered. I knew exactly where to find it.
Remember.
Corinne finally slipped up, leaving her tablet unlocked on the counter while she went to shower. I had 5 minutes, and I used them to capture everything. The screen was a graveyard of our marriage.
Fusions.
Months of messages with Tanner, explicitly graphic and undeniably intimate. There were plans for secret hotel stays and gym trysts, but the true dagger was a conversation from November.
Peace.
Corinne was complaining about the Thanksgiving dinner, about how much she hated pretending to be a wife. I'm thinking of saying something to make him finally get the message she had typed to him. Tanner's response was a simple mocking, laughing emoji and a cold savage. She hadn't just cheated. She had orchestrated my public humiliation as a calculated step to end the marriage. I didn't hesitate.
Feud.
I handed everything over to Polak, And on January 3 after, our daughter, Hannah, had safely returned to schoolie moved to strike.
3.
I waited until Corinne and our other daughter, Ellie, were home, before the process server arrived at 9 a.m. I was at Ronan's, waiting for the inevitable. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from Ellie.
Done, she's screaming.
Corinne called me 14 times that morning. On the 15th call, I finally answered. Are you out of your mind? She shrieked. The moment I picked up, you're divorcing me over one comment at dinner.
Filing Corinne.
I said, my voice ice cold. It's not about the comment. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Means I know about Tanner. I know about the hotels. I know about every single dollar you stole from our accounts to fund his life.
Ruined.
The silence on the other end was absolute a dead void that stretched on for 10 agonizing seconds. You went through my private messages? She finally whispered, her voice trembling.
You debt.
I went through our financial records, looking for the truth. I corrected her. What I found was evidence of adultery and financial misconduct. Her tone shifted instantly, losing its edge, becoming desperate.
Thing.
Please, we can talk about this. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I snapped. You made that choice repeatedly for months while using our family as a cover and our money as your piggy bank. Please just let me explain.
He said.
I don't need an explanation, I said and hung up. I turned off my phone, the weight of the last year finally starting to lift as I picked up a hammer to help Ronan finish his fence.
Thinking.
The following days were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering. Corin's attorney tried to paint me as the villain, claiming I was an emotionally distant husband who forced her into an affair.
Fend.
Polak didn't even argue, he simply pushed our evidence folder across the table. Not Dot. He showed them the hotel receipts that matched her work trips, the bank statements detailing the designer clothes she bought for her lover,
Phase end.
and the text messages detailing her plan to humiliate me at Thanksgiving. 3 days later, her attorney called back, his voice sounding completely drained.
Fuve.
He had spent hours trying to explain to Corinne that her dream settlement wasn't going to happen, that the law, the evidence and reality were all aligned against her.
You get.
Attorneys hate clients who refuse to see the truth, and he was clearly finished trying. But just as the storm seemed to be calming, a new shadow emerged.
Thinged.
Hannah, our daughter, suddenly inserted herself into the chaos, arriving at my front door with a look I didn't recognize. She wasn't crying, and she wasn't angry. She was holding her own phone, and the look in her eyes suggested that the real endgame was only just beginning. Dad, she said, her voice eerily calm. You think you found everything, but you didn't.
He stepped inside,
holding out her device as if it were a weapon. Corinne didn't just spend money on him, she continued. She recorded you. My blood ran cold. What do you mean recorded me?
he asked.
My grip, tightening on the doorframe. She's been hiding mics in the house for months. Dad, I found the cloud account. She's not just trying to win the divorce. She's trying to destroy your career too.
Fingled.
The revelation hit me like a physical blow, a sudden reversal of fortune that I hadn't prepared for. Everything I thought I had controlled was now suddenly back in the balance.
You.
I looked at the house at home I had fought to protect and realized the war was far from over. I looked back at Hannah, my heart breaking for what she had been forced to witness. Show me, I said, my voice barely a whisper.
Fix.
As we walked into the living room, I realized that justice wasn't something you were handed. It was something you had to dig for, even when the ground was covered in traps. I took the phone, ready to listen to the sounds of my own destruction. Knowing that if I survived this, I would finally be free. The screen flickered to life, showing a file dated just 2 days ago.
Thick.
Corini's voice echoed through the room, cold and calculating, planning a final blow that would have ruined me permanently. But she had forgotten one thing.
He had forgotten that in her arrogance,
she had used our daughter's tablet to upload the files. And Hannah had been watching all along. Ready to finish this? Hannah asked, her voice steady.
Vent.
I looked at her, then at the device, and a grim smile finally touched my lips. Yeah, I said, let's finish it. The game was no longer about the house or the money.
About survival, and for the first time in years, I was the one holding all the cards.
The screen shifted again, revealing a list of names. People Corinne had tried to bribe to testify against me.
Feudin.
It was a roadmap of her downfall, and I was going to follow it to the very end. Dot, get the car, Hannah, I said. It's time we pay a visit to her attorney. The silence that followed wasn't suffocating anymore.
It was the sound of a closing chapter.
And for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. Dot scene, a dimly lit office. The sound of a ticking clock is act. The protagonist sits back in his chair.
Think.
He stares at the screen. The voiceover begins calm but sharp. The silence in the house was the loudest thing I had ever heard.
End.
It had been weeks since the divorce papers were signed, but the echoes of Corny's betrayal still clung to the curtains. People like to believe that justice is a slow grinding wheel that eventually crushes the wicked.
Fix, but I learned the hard way.
That justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you engineer. My wife Corin thought she could dismantle our family while keeping her lifestyle intact.
Think.
She thought she could hide her affair with that gym trainer Tanner behind a veil of suburban normalcy. Dot and my eldest daughter Hannah. She was the accomplice I never saw coming.
Thousand.
Just a bystander. She was the silent architect of my humiliation. When the papers were finally served, Hannah didn't call to ask if I was okay.
He called.
To scream that I was a heartless monster for holding her mother accountable. How could you do this to our family? Dad, she shrieked over the phone.
Boot.
I sat there gripping the edge of my desk listening to her defend the woman who had burned our lives to the ground. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to explain the bank statements, the hotel receipts, or the private messages.
Things.
Let her vent until the silence returned. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Hannah, how long have you known? The pause that followed was long enough to reveal everything.
Thing.
She tried to stammer out a defense claiming I wouldn't understand, but the guilt was dripping from her voice. She had been covering for her mother since the summer.
Thing.
She had treated my life like a game of cat and mouse, laughing behind my back while I paid her tuition. I realized then that she hadn't just chosen a side. She had chosen a lifestyle of deception. I hung up on her.
2 days later,
She posted about letting go of toxic energy on Instagram. I suppose that's one way to describe the aftermath of being caught. The divorce negotiations were a battlefield, but I had the high ground.
fingered.
Corinne wanted the house, the assets, and the financial security I had spent 20 years building. But my attorney Polak was a shark in a tailored suit. We had the screenshots, the hotel bookings, and the proof of the unauthorized credit card in my name. Every time Corinne tried to play the victim, we presented a new layer of the truth.
Fusion.
The threat of a public trial, where her affair with a man 15 years younger would be read into the record, terrified her. She didn't want her friends to know. She didn't want her parents to see the transcripts of her late night texts. The house remained mine. The financial settlement was sliced down to the bare minimum she needed to survive, and not a penny more.
Thing.
I watched her crumble in the attorney's office sobbing because her leverage had evaporated. Custody was simple. Ellie, my youngest, had seen enough to know exactly who she wanted to live with.
Gabru.
The judge didn't even blink when Ellie laid it all out. February came with it the final signature. $8,000 in legal fees. Every single cent was a down payment on my sanity.
Frumsit.
But being legally divorced wasn't the end of the story. Hannah still thought she was untouchable. She was still enrolled in college, burning through my money while failing her classes.
Eel.
She thought the gravy train would run forever, regardless of how she treated me.
She was wrong.
I logged into the parent portal one last time. The reality was worse than I thought.
He wasn't.
Just failing. She had stopped showing up to class altogether. It was time for the final act of this arrangement. I canceled the tuition payment plan for the spring.
Beans.
She suddenly had to account for. I froze the secret credit card Corinne had opened in my name, one Hannah used for her emergencies like spa days and designer clothes.
Disputed every cent of it as fraud.
If they wanted to keep living in a lie, they were going to have to find a way to fund it themselves. But I wasn't finished until I looked the catalyst in the eye. Tanner.
BC found his new gym a place where he thought he could reinvent himself.
I waited in the lot until I saw him walking toward his silver Nissan. Can I help you? He asked, not recognizing the man he'd ruined. Tanner, right?
Kept my voice low steady. Yeah, who's asking?
Isaac, I said, leaning against his fender, Corin's husband, or ex-husband, now thanks to you. The blood drained from his face instantly. I didn't need to shout.
Need to throw a punch.
I just watched the realization dawn on him that his new beginning was nothing more than a debt that was finally coming due. I walked away without looking back.
Dean.
The story wasn't a tragedy and it wasn't a loss. It was a reset. I drove home, unlocked my front door, and for the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged to me. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful.
Justice wasn't a court verdict.
It was the feeling of knowing that the people who tried to break me were now facing a world they had no idea how to navigate.
First time in a long time
I finally felt like I could breathe.
You?
He stared at me, his eyes wide and vacant, clearly failing to place my face for a fleeting moment. Doc Tanner, isn't it? I asked, my voice steady and cold.
Yeah, who's asking?
He shifted his weight, trying to project that familiar, arrogant Gimbro confidence. Isaac Corrins. Husband. I let the name hang in the air, watching, as the realization hit him like a physical blow.
Seasoned.
Well, ex-husband now to be precise, and I have you to thank for that. The color drained from his face, replaced by a sudden frantic flush of crimson before he went pale again. He stumbled back, a step looking as if he were scanning the parking lot for an exit route. His hands, usually so steady, while lifting heavy iron, started to tremble uncontrollably.
It was almost laughable all that time.
Spent sculpting his physique. All that ego, and he looked ready to collapse at the sight of a middle-aged office manager.
Relax, I said.
Keeping my tone deceptively friendly, I'm not here to start a brawl. Actually, I wanted to express my gratitude.
Thank me?
His voice cracked high and thin.
Absolutely.
I continued my smile, not reaching my eyes. You see, your little affair saved me about $50,000 in the divorce settlement.
Yo.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being so reckless with those text messages. He didn't know how to respond, simply standing there, looking physically ill, as the weight of his stupidity finally sank in.
Look, man.
I didn't know, he stammered, pathetic and small. Oh, I'm sure you did, I replied, savoring the way he squirmed. I pushed off from his car and smoothed out my jacket, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me.
Feast it.
One more piece of advice, I added, lowering my voice. Small towns have long memories. Corin's social circle is quite connected, and once word gets out about the personal trainer who destroys marriages,
Beauty. Your client list is going to shrink very, very quickly.
I walked away without looking back, leaving him in the silence of his own consequences. I didn't need to check if he was watching. I already knew he was crumbling.
To Carver.
I heard that Tanner eventually left the big commercial gym to do private sessions in clients' homes. It was quieter that way. I suppose no nosy coworkers, no locker room gossip to navigate.
Finn.
Whether he made the switch because of our encounter or because the rumors were already poisoning his reputation. I didn't care.
Finction.
Carver also mentioned that Tanner moved back in with his parents just 2 months after the final decree.
Fingting.
The Instagram posts, once filled with luxury gym selfies and expensive protein shakes, became significantly less frequent after the money dried up.
You.
Corinne tried to keep the charade going for a while, but Tanner went cold as soon as the alimony checks and gifts stopped flowing. He eventually blocked her number and ghosted her entirely. The fantasy was never going to last without a steady stream of funding, but things fell apart for them with startling speed once the reality of their situation set in.
Thengens.
Corinne's first apartment was a grim little place, a tubed room unit on the outskirts of town, where the walls were thin and the neighborhood was loud. She complained about everything.
The noisy neighbors.
The poor water pressure, the lack of space. She complained about everything, in fact, except for the poor decisions that had landed her in that exact spot.
Finked.
Without my income to subsidize her lifestyle, the facade shattered overnight. The credit cards she had used to maintain her curated life were maxed out within 8 weeks.
Bent.
Her gym membership was terminated when the bank declined the payment. She had to trade in the high-end SUV V for a beat-up decade-old Corolla because the monthly payments were drowning her.
Expensive serums, the designer wardrobe.
The ring light for her vanity all of it had to be sold off just to make rent. Her social circle, which she once thought was impenetrable, dried up almost instantly.
Fushi.
Word about the affair had traveled fast, and nobody wanted to be seen with the woman who had traded her marriage for a trainer, half her age, only to be caught with digital evidence.
Pipian.
Even her sister Vivian eventually confessed to Ellie that Shed lost respect for Corinne long before that final Thanksgiving. The midlife crisis that had triggered this entire collapse had hit a brick wall.
Frind.
Without the thrill of the affair and the financial cushion to keep up appearances, Corinne was finally forced to stare into the mirror of her own choices.
Vingsid.
The last I heard, she had started attending church and posting cryptic quotes about spiritual journeys on social media. Make of that what you will. Hannah's path turned out exactly as I had foreseen.
Fischl.
Without my tuition checks arriving on time, she had to scramble for high-interest emergency loans halfway through the semester. The debt was astronomical, the stress was suffocating.
Fend.
And the credit card dispute meant Corinne was personally liable for the $3,000 in unauthorized charges. When the final grades were posted, Hannah ended up on academic probation anyway.
Vect.
All those nights spent at parties instead of in the library. All those skipped lectures. All the money I had poured into her future completely squandered. One of her professors emailed me unaware of the divorce, asking if everything was all right because Hannah hadn't even shown up for the final exam. I didn't bother to reply. She dropped out at the end of the spring term and moved into that cramped apartment with her mother. She took a job at a department store in the mall, barely scraping by on minimum wage. Through Ellie, I heard false stories of the constant screaming matches between them.
Fing.
They argued over money, over living space, over who was to blame for their downward spiral. Who forgot to pay the electric bill? Who ate the last of the groceries? Who was supposed to handle the trash?
Fengshin.
They had turned on each other with a venomous speed now that there was no common enemy to unite them.
Fear.
It was almost poetic how the mother-daughter duo, who had conspired to ruin me, couldn't even survive 6 months in each other's presence. It's easy to be partners in crime when someone else is footing the bill.
Thing.
But the dynamic changes when you're fighting over the last roll of toilet paper. Meanwhile, my own life has become significantly better, quieter, and infinitely more peaceful.
Fade. The background noise of constant low-level stress that
I'd lived with for years vanished. And I hadn't even realized how heavy it was until I finally set it down.
finished the back deck.
I refinished the back deck that spring, spending my weekends sanding and staining until the wood looked brand new. There is a profound satisfaction in working with your hands, in seeing the tangible results of your labor.
No office politics, no financial spreadsheets, no deceit.
Just the grain of the wood, the grit of the sandpaper, and the clean scent of the finish. I even reorganized the garage into a functional workshop instead of a graveyard for junk. Corinne had filled it with years of discarded clutter, clothes she never wore,
Fitness equipment she used twice.
and holiday decorations for parties we hadn't hosted in a decade. Rented a dumpster, cleared it all out in a single weekend, and built custom shelving.
For the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually home.
The garage used to be a museum of Corinne's whims. There were designer clothes. She never wore expensive gym equipment. She touched exactly twice.
Fuse it.
And bins of holiday decor for parties we hadn't hosted. In years, I didn't ask for permission. I rented a dumpster, spent an entire weekend clearing out the ghosts of our failed life, and built solid, honest shelving.
Feud.
I hung my tools, exactly where I could reach them, claimed the space as mine, and started fishing again on Saturday mornings. Something I'd abandoned years ago because Corinne used to roll her eyes and call it a waste of time.
Fitting by a mirror still lake at 6 a.m.
Watching the fog burn off the water. In silence was the medicine I'd been starving for. Just me, the bait, and the beautiful heavy quiet. Ellie and I found a new rhythm too.
Fuse.
Sunday breakfasts became our sanctuary, and we'd binge-watch movies on weeknights when her homework was done. I taught her the things that actually matter. How to swap a flat, how to check the oil, how to jump a battery. She made the honor roll that semester, her grades soaring for the first time in years. She started dating a boy from chemistry named Tommy Kid, who looked like he'd seen a ghost when he met me at the door. He had a firm handshake and held my gaze. That counts for everything. One night, Ellie told me, Dad, I feel like I can finally breathe in this house. Ronan and I grew closer too, our weekly lunches turning into a ritual I genuinely craved. My circle was smaller, but the foundation was steel. The people in my life finally had my back.
Fanny.
And then early in May, the past pulled into my driveway. I was in the garage, hunched over a 1960s Zenith radio. I was painstakingly restoring. I heard a car door slam, and when I looked up, there was Hannah.
He was climbing out of that beat-up.
Civic Corinne had bought her after the split. She looked hollow, thinner than I remembered, and not in a way that looked healthy.
Binged.
The bratty, confident girl who had cackled at my humiliation just months ago was completely gone. In her place was someone the world had been hitting with a sledgehammer. Dad, she whispered, her voice cracking like dry wood.
Fuck.
My pliers down and leaned against the workbench, keeping my distance. I didn't invite her in. Everything is falling apart, she sobbed, and the tears started flowing like a dam breaking.
Finan.
Mom's apartment is a dump. The landlord is threatening us with eviction. I had to drop out of school because we couldn't make tuition and dime working at the mall for pennies. The car is dying. Everything is just broken.
Finned.
I stood there and let her spill it all. I watched as the reality of her sheltered, entitled world finally crumbled under the weight of actual life,
He talked for 5 minutes straight.
waiting for me to be the fixer, the man who always solved the problems she and her mother created. When the silence finally returned, I took a long, steady breath.
You helped her lie to me for months.
I said, my voice dangerously calm. You covered for her affair, like it was a fun little game.
Humiliate me in front of our entire family.
And then you called me cruel for cutting off the money. I know, she sobbed. I made mistakes. You made choices. I corrected her, cutting her off.
Every single day.
You chose to betray me every time you lied about where she was. Every time you smirked at the dinner table. Like you two were in on some secret joke. That wasn't a mistake, Hannah. That was an act.
Your daughter.
She cried, desperate now. I love you, I said, meeting her eyes. But love isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card for betrayal. There are consequences for the life you helped build.
So, you're just going to watch us starve?
She screamed. I'm going to let you figure it out, I replied, turning back to my radio. You're 19, you wanted the adult lifestyle now. You get to deal with the adult consequences.
You want a relationship with me.
You earn it not with tears, not with excuses, with actions, real consistent change. And if I can't? She asked, her voice trembling. Then you have your answer.
Think.
I watched her through the corner of my eye. She stood there for a long, agonizing minute, waiting for me to fold. I didn't. Eventually, the engine of that old Civic sputtered to life and faded down the street.
Things.
An hour later, Ellie walked into the garage. Shed heard it all from the kitchen. You okay, Dad? Yeah, kiddo, I'm okay. That was brutal. She sighed. It was the truth, I said. She sat on a stool and looked at me.
Fainted.
I thought Shed at least say she was sorry. People only apologize when they feel guilt. She was just feeling the loss of her convenience. Ellie leaned in and gave me a long, tight hug. I'm proud of you, Dad.
Thanks, kiddo. I'm proud of you too.
That night, I sat on the deck it built with my own two hands watching the sun dip below the trees. The house was quiet, peaceful.
You.
Corinne once called me her greatest regret in front of everyone we knew. Well, she did me a favor. I'm nobody's regret anymore. And I'm certainly nobody's punchline.
You.
The house was silent, a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet that echoed against the empty walls. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the life I had built for 10 years now, reduced to dust.
E.g.
My wife Hannah had stood in front of all our friends and family just 2 days ago, calling me her greatest regret. She said it with a smile, a cruel, sharpened dagger, of a smile that made everyone laugh at my expense.
Phasian.
Corinne, her sister, had stood right beside her, whispering something that made Hannah laugh even louder. looking at me like I was some pathetic bug under her shoe.
View this.
I was the punchline of their twisted game, the man who provided everything while they plotted behind my back. Misk. And for the longest time, I believed I was the problem, that I wasn't enough.
Fingsin.
But looking at the bank statements and the forged documents I found hidden in the designer handbags she needed for her work, the truth finally set in. She didn't just want a divorce. She wanted to strip me of every single cent, using our shared accounts to fund a life I wasn't invited to.
Fishin.
The conflict started when I noticed the inconsistencies in our monthly budget, the business trips that always seemed to land at a Marriott near the city center.
Fixing.
I hired an attorney, a shark named Pollack, who didn't care about feelings, only about the cold, hard numbers.
Feed.
Hannah thought I was still the blind, obedient husband, ready to hand over the house and the savings without a fight.
First turning point came.
When I intercepted a voicemail meant for her secret friend, a guy named Tommy, detailing how she planned to leave me destitute by December.
Didn't cry. I didn't scream.
I just started recording every single interaction, every conversation, every shred of evidence.
You woke up.
The second turning point was the morning she woke up to find the locks changed and a formal notice on the door.
He called me screaming.
Her voice cracking with a mix of rage and genuine confusion, as if she truly believed she was the victim.
How could you do this, Isaac?
She hissed through the phone, her voice sounding thin and desperate.
You're the one who said I was your greatest regret.
Hannah, I replied, my voice, steady, feeling a wave of cold justice wash over me.
Thing.
Just helping you move on to your new life without my assets. I added the silence. On her end, becoming deafening. She tried to play the card of the neglected wife, the woman who had been suffering in silence.
Things eggs worn.
But I had the screenshots, the hotel receipts, and the logs of her secret accounts. The climax arrived on a Tuesday in front of the judge, where I presented everything.
Fusty.
From the forged signatures on the mortgage documents to the stolen funds hidden in offshore tax-free accounts.
Face.
Her face drained of color as the judge reviewed the evidence, realizing that her master plan had just become the blueprint for her legal downfall. There was a final painful moment where she looked at me,
Thep.
hoping for a flicker of the man who used to love her, but found nothing but a void.
Fiends.
The plot twist was that she thought I was alone in this, but I had reached out to her parents months ago, showing them exactly who their daughter had become.
She walked out of that courtroom.
She had no house, no alimony, and no family left to turn to. I, on the other hand, walked into the sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years, knowing that I was finally free.
Faint.
I am nobody's regret, and I am definitely nobody's punchline anymore. Guys, we are so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and every single one of you matters.
Subscribed.
Please consider hitting that button, as it truly helps us grow and continue sharing these stories. Thank you for being part of this journey and helping turn a nightmare into a new beginning.